I also have this microphone, which I was going to drop the mic later, but I guess I can't do that either. Next month. A few things before we get going. So we have a few safety rules you got to know when you're in here, because this is all, the FAA gets kind of prickly about what you do. So nobody is allowed to walk and leave on the tarmac ever. No, wait, that's not true. You can't leave without escort. So please, if you need to leave early, wait for in the back and we have an escort, and that'll get you out of here. We do have access to the restrooms. They're up here on the left. But there's additional ones that are in the reception area where you came in. So if that's the case, again, you need the escort to get through. Tours. If you purchased a tour, the tour will be back at the reception desk back there with Maureen. If you did not purchase a tour, but you say, hey, that's a cool idea, I want to go on a tour, go back there with $35 and Maureen will make sure you get hooked up for that as well. So those are kind of the basic announcements for today's program. Before we get started, I do want to thank our annual sponsors, without whom none of this is possible, and start with our newest annual sponsor, JP Morgan. We're very happy to have them. In addition to Guernsey Schneider, Calabasas Capital, Union Bank, the CBIZ Valuation Group, California Lutheran University School of Management, the accounting firm of Crowe Horwath, the law firm of Stubbs, Alderton and Margulies, Etonian, Singer Lewack, Fox Rothschild, and the Pacific Coast Business Times, and last but not least, our founding sponsor, Wells Fargo Bank. Please help me thank all of our sponsors. Also want to make a quick announcement that we have expanded the board, and we're excited to have Melissa Fulmer from Etonian joining us starting next month, so thank you, Melissa. And since we are, squatting in their facility, I did want to invite Brian Council to come up and say a few words. There's Brian. Just a welcome. So please welcome Brian Council.
Hey, good morning. Thank you very much for being here. We're happy to host this event. We're delighted to have you all here. Forgive me, I just didn't want to take up panel time to introduce Senator Jets just for a minute. So I want to do that beforehand. Again, we operate this facility and several aircraft out of this airport, and we fly anywhere around the world from here. And so everyone on your table place setting, you have a card, which is a Altitude Club card that is our membership program that offers benefits and unique opportunities customized to you or your company for what we do here, and that is flights to anyone around the world. So I invite you to take that card home, go to the website alt410.com to indicate to us who you are and how we can then begin to work with you to customize what we do on behalf of individuals and corporations around this county, Ventura County, plus also we have a facility in Van Nuys as well. So anyway, again, welcome. I'll be around afterwards. We'll be hosting the tours for those of you who have registered and or registered today. We'll be able to walk through some aircraft and answer questions and take you on the tour. So again, good morning. Thank you very much for being here. We're happy to have you.
So to this program, and today we have to thank some sponsors specific for this program, including Sun Aerojets, Bibby Financial Services, and Cone Resnick. So would you take a moment and help me thank the people who are helping us put this event on. And with that, let's get started. I'd like to invite up Michael Levy from Bibby Financial, who is going to give us a quick overview of what the aerospace industry means to Southern California. Michael?
Thanks, Steph. Southern California has a rich and often overlooked history in aerospace. Actually, USC study had said that Southern California as we know it would not exist without the aerospace industry. Early in the 20th century, millions of people flooded Southern California aerospace jobs, transforming Southern California from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy. As early as 1910, they were holding air meets in Southern California at Dominguez Field, which is probably somewhere close to Compton right now. In 1910, the world's altitude record was set in Southern California at 4,600 feet. So we've come a long way at that time. In 1912, the Wright brothers were doing demonstrations also at Dominguez Hills. Today, if we look at it, the industry spends more than $24 billion in goods and services each year. The industry pays out over $11 billion in wages and benefits. Employs 85,000 direct people in manufacturing, and probably an additional 150 to 200,000 people are involved in direct support of the aerospace industry. I think economically, that has been considered an industry cluster built around aircraft manufacturing, airplane manufacturing, engineering, instrumentation, and avionics. Most of the growth in the aircraft industry in the last 7 or 8 years, interestingly enough, is in Ventura County. Los Angeles has lost some jobs, San Diego is still growing, but in the 4 counties around Southern California, the growth of the industry is very strong. Hard to believe everybody complains that there's no manufacturing going on anymore in Southern California. The aerospace industry is a direct enunciation of that. Manufacturing is growing all the time. With that, let me introduce Mayor Rosenberg, who will host our panel, and we will start the program. Thank you.
Good morning. If the panelists could come up, please. While they're doing that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Mayor Rosenberg. I am a partner with Cohn Resnick. We are a national accounting firm providing insurance, tax, and consulting services. I lead the manufacturing and wholesale distribution group for the Western region with an emphasis in aerospace and defense. I want to welcome everyone this morning to our panel event. We have a distinguished panel here. Let me just introduce them very quickly to you, and then each of you can just give a little bit of background for yourselves. To my left is U.S. Navy Captain Chris Yunke. He is the commanding officer of the U.S. Naval Base here in Ventura County. To his left is Brian Consul, who you've met, and he is president and COO of Sun Air Jets. To his left is Travis Mack, president and CEO of Salex Solutions, and to the far left is U.S. Navy Captain retired Brad Rick Connors, a former Top Gun pilot and a drone UAV expert. So, Captain, please give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's great, and I told everybody today it's always good to get back to aviation because my job every day involves just a tiny bit of aviation because I am in charge of an airfield. But just to give you a little background on me, I'm a naval flight officer. And so in common man term parlance, that's the backseat guy or the back of the airplane of P3s and P8s. So we're the other part of naval aviation that is not on board an aircraft carrier. If you're familiar with the P3, it's been flying since the Cuban Missile Crisis. is in dire need of a transition to the P8, which is the equivalent of a 737-900. And we're deep into transition at this time. So I just came from being the chief of staff of our East Coast home base in Jacksonville, Florida, where we have half of our squadrons which have all transitioned to the P8. So luckily of my 4,000 hours, I got a couple hundred hours in the P8 so far, and I love the new airplane smell. But in the Navy's infinite wisdom, and Britt can attest to this, at the twilight of our careers, the Navy decides to throw us into something totally unfamiliar, totally uncomfortable, and say, here, do it. And that is running Naval Base Ventura County. And if you don't know, we've combined 3 locations together back in 2004. Thanks to Brick's effort, he was the guy trudging through that struggle, and I'm the beneficiary of it. So we have Port Hueneme, which is home of our Seabees on their west coast, Point Magoo, which is home to our west coast Hawkeye squadrons, as well as test and evaluation, and San Nicolas Island. And not to be forgotten is a small little 36,000 square mile sea range that is right offshore here. And if any of you fly around here, you know you have to navigate around it on a daily basis. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Again, I've been here at Center Jets for 16 years. I'm a tax attorney and accountant, and I run the business of this business. Over the course of more than 10 years here, we've developed all that's here and now. Ventura County is very pleased to know that there's several $100 million worth of assets here at the airport that they can tax. You know, the sales tax revenue, the property tax revenue, and stuff like that. So the airport's thrilled to have us. Over the course of the decade or so, we've developed all these assets here, and so we're very proud to call this county home. And again, be delighted to talk to you more afterwards. But that's me.
So a couple of things here before we move on to Travis. Brian, I want to thank you for letting us use your home this morning for the event. And second of all, you heard Brian say he is an accountant, right? Accountants are not all boring people with the plane. See that? So I just want you to take a look at it, folks. Travis, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Travis Mack. I'm the president and CEO for Salex Solutions Incorporated. Salex is a local small business that primarily supports in the areas of test range, operations and management, logistics, and engineering services support. So as the captain mentioned, that wonderful little sea range that sits out there, we actually support that range and the day-to-day operations of that range. And so we're delighted to be here. I've been at the head of Salex for about 19 years now, and I'm excited to be here and share some small business perspectives and aerospace perspectives, and amongst this distinguished panel today. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Travis. Britt?
Thank you. I haven't seen Travis in, I don't know, 2 years. He keeps on ignoring me, so this is the only way I could get to see him. Thank you for inviting me. Great panel, great group of folks I've known professionally, except for Brian. It was wonderful to meet you, and thanks for hosting. I retired a few years ago, and I mainly went in the aerospace industry, and I worked business development strategies on the international as well as domestic side for Northrop Grumman, and we were combined with Boeing in many different projects, and Lockheed on many different projects as well. We also worked on technology development strategies to conform to and anticipate the requirements of the U.S. military primarily, but other international militaries, allies, friends, those types of entities, in developing our products for the future, including UAVs and UAV systems and sensor integration that goes along with that. And so eventually I decided to go it on my own and transition. I'm now in financial services with the Group Financial, and I also operate a management consulting business as well. So thanks for having me on the panel.
Great, thank you. So, according to a report issued in March, the LA Economic Development Corp reported that in 2014, the aerospace industry represented over 85 direct jobs in Southern California, 14% of the total U.S. employment in the space. All told, Southern California's aerospace industry generates over 246,000 jobs, including positions in its supply chain. It's the second largest industry for jobs in California, and it would seem that a key driver for the future of this industry is programs at our high schools and universities training the workers of the future. So I have some questions for each of you about this. Brian, do you see a lack of commercial pilots in today's environment, and if so, what impact does that have to your business?
Yeah, absolutely. The primary drivers of pilots in our industry and the commercial industry has been student pilots, plus also pilots coming out of the military. Quite frankly, traditionally or currently about a third of the airline pilots are former military folks. And today, it costs about $100,000 or more to get private pilot's license up through, the ATP requirement that would be required to enter commercial airline service now. So the threshold for entering the pilot ranks now is so expensive and so high. And there's so many commercial airline pilots who are retired. The Vietnam era pilots are all up against, the 65-year-old age limit. And so the commercial sector is desperate for pilots. And there's just not as many being produced by the military, and the military is struggling to keep them as well. And so they're offering incentive programs to pilots to stick around beyond 10 years. And so it's a real strain. And what they're beginning to do, as you mentioned, is to begin pilot training programs where they're going to grab kids earlier and help encourage them through the system through training programs and flight school programs and stuff like that. So it's a real changing dynamic.
So I'm curious, for your business, how do you recruit pilots?
Yeah, typically it's the traditional model. It's just to find either former military pilots, out of the Navy. We've got Navy pilots on staff, and or guys, younger pilots that have been earning their time through flight training or other jobs, quite frankly, whether they could be flying private aircraft for individuals or corporations to accumulate the minimum 1,500 hours, which that's no joke. That's a substantial amount of time. So
Great.
we look to steal them from other places, quite frankly.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Captain Yankee, with drones flying more missions, will there be enough pilots to keep up with the demand?
Well, simply, I think the answer is yes. And the way, I can speak for the way that the Navy is kind of taken the approach to the unmanned systems and how they're going to incorporate them. And I say the word incorporate because that's truly how we're doing it. So back when my community, P3, was doing the initial, they call it analysis of alternatives, where they want to figure out, do we need a new airplane? What does that new airplane look like? What are the alternatives? One of the things that was considered very heavily for the replacement for the P3 Orion was an unmanned platform. And not to supplement, but to totally replace. And so one of the very smart captains that I knew that was in the Pentagon in the program office said, we're not going to beat them, we're going to join them. And so what he did is he put a few of his people in the unmanned working group that was considering that, and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to use an unmanned system to supplement our manned system. So if you remember, during the Gulf War, there wasn't a Gulf War and then follow on to Operation Iraqi Freedom and things like that. There weren't a lot of Iraqi submarines to track. So not really a lot of business for us to do. So my community, I'm very proud to say we adapt, we flex. And what we did is we strapped a really nice camera on board an anti-submarine hunting aircraft, and we found a new mission. But that bit us later in the fact that we needed a new airplane, and a new airplane with just a camera on it isn't going to sell in the Pentagon or with Congress. And so what we did is we reinvented ourselves and said, hey, remember back in the early 90s, or late 80s, we tracked Russian submarines? We can do that. And so that is what's got us the PA. Now getting back to the question is, so how does Triton come into it? Well, every unmanned system in the Navy is embedded in a manned community. And so Triton will be a part of the P8 community. They'll start off in the P8, and they'll do some time in the Triton, and then eventually somewhere in there, there'll be a Y in the road where you'll end up being in command of a P-8 squadron or a Triton squadron. So what we've done is incorporate that. And if you look at other communities, they've done the same thing in the Navy. The Fire Scouts, which are the rotary winged unmanned aircraft, are embedded in the manned helicopter community. And the other thing that's a nice byproduct of that is any new platform or any new community, the Navy has dictated zero manpower growth. So how do we do that? Well, a P3 squadron goes typically from 330 people, and when it transitions to P8, it only needs 280. Well, there's 50 people right there. So you add that up across 12 squadrons, and now you have enough people to man up the Triton squadrons and do that. So those pilots and also the back-end operators, which I feel are just as important as the bus drivers up front, those folks are coming from manned platform communities, and they go back and forth, and that's how we keep it.
Great. Thank you. Travis, are there enough people being trained in engineering to support the systems that the A&D companies need to develop to be competitive in the marketplace?
Well, that's always an interesting challenge. Right off the bat, I'll say no. I think everyone understands the gravity of the issues that we have with training, and especially in the engineering type fields and things of that nature. What we've seen as a small business who primarily support a lot of engineering functions and efforts is that we're trying to groom them internally. We're trying to find resources and institutions that we can team with in order to, for lack of a better term, have a bench perspective. And not waiting for the rug to be pulled out from under us. We want to have those individuals sitting on the sideline, coming up through the ranks and being trained properly. So any of the education institutions, that are engineering focused, we're trying to form relationships with them, especially if they're local, if they're near our facilities, if they're near the programs or the entities that we're actually supporting. I know CSU's Channel Islands has been working with us from engineering perspectives and technology perspectives in order to be able to try and grow that base. So we figure if we attack them early, they'll hang around with us for a while. So that's always a challenge, an ongoing challenge.
Brick, a few years ago, the talk of the industry was that manufacturing capacity was just insufficient to meet demand for building aircraft for the coming 10 years. Has anything changed in the last couple of years?
I'm not a proponent of that position. In fact, I would say that capacity is underutilized. In particular, there's been a huge migration, not necessarily from California, but from other manufacturing sites down to Florida and Texas, with El Segundo and Palmdale being the primary aircraft manufacturing sites for military aircraft in kind of the recent 2 to 3 years. One of my missions at Northrop Grumman was to convince Congress that the industry base, specifically in California, is precious and something that has to be invested in. So our position was growing the programs of record for military airplanes. Right now, there's the F-18 plant, for example, down in El Segundo, makes also the Growler and a couple other things, is looking at the end of production in the next 2 to 3 years. And that facility, at one point was making hundreds of airplanes a year. So loss of those types of facilities is going to be a significant event in the aerospace industry in the not too distant future. Now there's been some migration to Palmdale, and they do some pretty unique things in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, with use of robotics, because one of the big things in advanced manufacturing now is the tolerances required to make parts and components and integrate those in the manufacturing process are beyond the human capability for the variation requirements and the quality requirements. So most of that is all going to be robotics.
Do you think we'll see continued demand in the aerospace and defense industry for contractors here in Southern California?
Yeah, I definitely think so, for a couple of reasons. One of them is, and Travis and Nick mentioned it, one of the big issues in terms of the replacement of engineers is that we have an aging workforce, just like a lot of industries. And there's probably a 20-year corporate knowledge gap. There have been aggressive events and initiatives to replace that workforce, but it's slow coming. So one of the benefits that California has is a proven and exercised infrastructure in terms of integration with education. For example, Northrop Grumman sends, and Boeing and Lockheed, they all send their composites engineers through the same courses through local colleges. One of Dick Rush's legacies is going to be the development of an engineering school here at Cal State University, Channel Islands. And so we can quickly replicate that workforce. So there is going to be challenges to meeting the aerospace needs in terms of qualified and experienced engineering corps.
Do you think we're at risk for the work being outsourced to foreign manufacturers?
It's kind of interesting working on the international foreign military sales. When you sell an airplane, or you try to sell a military airplane to another country, there's shackles associated with doing that. And one of them is the offset program. And every offset program, in an attempt to sell F-35s or Super Hornets or Growlers, involves some level of technology transfer, because all those countries, whether it's Brazil, whether it's India, or Australia or Japan, they want to have an opportunity to play catch up in the advantages that we have in our aerospace manufacturing. And so in all these deals that you see going on, there is a component of technology transfer with a very particular interest in composites.
Captain Yankee, North Korea's most recent rocket tests have failed, but eventually they will have rockets capable of reaching Japan, South Korea, and even North America. How does long-term strategic planning in the defense industry plan for that kind of threat?
Well, I think if we're planning now, we're way behind. But the good news is we've been planning for a long time, and a lot of technology that's out there is to think about ballistic missile capability, long-range missile capability, and not only detection, but defeat in the air. There's a ton of initiatives and platforms that are going on that are using existing systems, especially the Aegis ships. And we have those on station right now that are monitoring and have the weapon capability to knock down a lot of these things. I think more what we need to keep our eye on, and probably everybody's seen it in the news lately, is our old foe, the Russians. They seem to be testing the waters, testing the boundaries. I feel like right now they're an angry teenager trying to see how late they can stay out, by how close they want to fly to our ships. But you should know that, even the platform that I fly, and I follow it closely, is we are now moving back into areas and flying missions in places that I really saw just a little bit when I came into flying in around the early 90s, and now we're going back there. And people are saying, whoa, 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 don't tear that hangar down. We might need that. I did 3 deployments in Iceland, and saw that shortly after I was there shut down, and now there's talk of opening it back up. And we know that's not to monitor Norway's aggression to the United States. So we know exactly what that's for. And bases in far northern Japan, we're flying out of there, and and plus, always we have to keep an eye on our Chinese friends. There are missions that occur every single day in the South China Sea that are keeping an eye on China. And I think if the Chinese were doing the same thing to us that we are doing to them as far as monitoring and presence, we'd be a little bit uncomfortable. But I think it should make us feel comfortable that the amount of presence that is out there forward. The CNO, prior to our current CNO, he made a decision as Afghanistan and Iraq were winding down that we would pivot to the Pacific. And we have surely done that. The first place that my platform that I know that it deployed was not to the Middle East. where shots were being fired. It was deployed to Okinawa, Japan, to be on the forefront with China, and now the second place it's deployed is in the northern frontier of the Pacific, to keep an eye on Russia. So I think we fear North Korea because they're a loose cannon. We can talk all day about their leader over there and what he's going to do or what he might do, but I have faith personally that the Chinese will keep an eye on their little brother and make sure that he does not do things that disrupts world order. Because although China is skyrocketing in technology and weapons development, and they're our main competitor in that area, I think they enjoy the world order in an economic sense just like we do.
Thank you. Brian, drones are causing safety issues around the airports. Recently there was a collision between a drone and an Airbus jet at Heathrow. What's being done to protect the airline industry and the safety?
Yeah, sure, you bet. It's a rapidly changing environment. Obviously, you can, for a relatively small investment, now become a pilot in congested airspace with no prior training or anything like that. So immediately upon sense of danger, the federal government gets involved quite quickly. And as that usually is the case in rapid federal action, it can be overregulated really quite quickly, and confusion ensues. So here at Camarillo Airport, they've begun to try and register drones. If you drove down Las Posas, you all drove past a sign saying that UAS operators, please register. There's no drone zone over the airport. And then in theory, if you're operating within range of the airport, you're supposed to give advance notice to the airport of your operations. That has had the collateral consequence of hampering efforts on behalf of law enforcement. Keeping the honest people honest. In other words, the teenager doesn't know this, but law enforcement's hampered with what they do because they have to abide by the rules. So there's always been the hazard of young student pilots flying around in the pattern when we have these aircraft coming up the tailpipe real quick, and they're learning and all that kind of stuff. So we've always had the hazard of controlled aircraft in the pattern being a challenge, but now you've got teenagers in the pattern who really don't know or understand. So it is a problem, and they're trying to address it by overlaying no drone zones around airports. But it is a significant concern. If you're on short file and you absorb one of these through your motor, it's going to get your attention. The airport's trying to react to it, and all airports are.
Thank you. Rick, how do we avoid too much innovation killing over regulation on the drone market? Is that happening?
There's, I thought about that a little bit, innovation killing. Innovation in air vehicles, I don't think is necessarily the focus of innovation in the UAV market space. I think the innovation is going to come with some of the threats to general aviation, integration of airspace, Technovoid, and probably more importantly, the command and control security. Just like getting hacked, all these systems are hack-proof. So, there's a recent tactical UAV that was hijacked by the Iranians a few years ago, and they put it on display. And our guess at the time was that it was a Russian interleaved assisted hacking event where they basically took control of the platform and then captured and brought it back. So a lot of the integration, because obviously every UAV that flies has some kind of ground integration, and that has to be secured. A lot of the systems are going to autonomous flying, where they pre-program it if they have failures in communication, they execute autonomous responses and flight profiles back to where they need to go. So that's the other thing. And probably the biggest innovation that I see in that market is going to be payload management and sensor integration. The Amazon Prime Air, for example, they want to deliver packages, but most of these UAVs are in the less than 5-pound payload range, and so I think the sweet spot for that market is going to be somewhere below 200 pounds. And when you get into that category, range, trade-offs, weight trade-offs, and then integrating that into a logistics routing structure is going to be very complex. And so those are the areas I see for integration on the commercial side. On the military side is signature management, so that they can go into less than passive or more than passive environments.
Thank you. Travis, with cybersecurity being such a high priority issue for so many companies, do we need to be concerned about cybersecurity when it comes to drones as well as other aircraft in the sky?
Oh, absolutely. That platform in and of itself, and how do you protect it? Everything's integrated today, and cybersecurity continues. Its presence just continues to grow. With the advent of technology and innovation and things of that nature, we're always fighting the battle of how do you protect it in a cyber world, and some of these things just haven't been thought about. Because it's never been a scenario that we've had to consider in the past. And so I wake up every single day worried about cybersecurity. Your kids got iPads and everything else. I was running the other day and I saw a lady running with her child. And, back in the day, they sat there and they watched the run. The child had an iPad and probably a little Apple phone on the side, a little smartphone on the side, and I'm like, wow, things are steadily progressing. But to address your question, absolutely, cybersecurity continues to grow, and how we deal with it is something that's going to be a challenge for the foreseeable future.
Great, thank you. So I want to ask one final question before we go to questions by the audience, but I want to give you a phrase that I recently heard and I really resonated with me, and so I'd like to ask you a question. What does not challenge us does not change us. Right? I'll say it again. What does not challenge us does not change us. So, Captain Yankee, what is it that you see on the horizon, challenges, and what changes do you need to make?
Well, I'll kind of go back to something that's on my forefront, that's not very sexy, but it is going to be an issue. We have problems with, and this is across all DoD, is installation infrastructure. So for an example, we're looking very much forward to Triton coming here to Point Mugu. They already have their maintenance school there. They're working on a hangar, and they're planning on building a larger hangar, if you remember where the golf course used to be out there by the PCH. But what does not come included with that is the high fence that they require for security to be around the entire airfield, the connectivity, fiber optic that needs to run out there, the plumbing, the basic electrical, all the things that need to go out there. They will build the hangar, they will pay for it out of the program dollars that have been appropriated by Congress, but the pieces and parts to support it are really failing. A recent study came out and said about over 35% of the structures on DoD installations are in failing condition, and yet we do not fund. We don't have a plan to fund those replacement of those buildings. Sustainment of, if you look at a new platform, we all know that over 80% of the total life cost of a new platform is sustainment, and we do a great job. We do that with aircraft and ships and submarines, but we don't do that with our facilities. And I think the U.S. saw that a little while ago when we started talking about bridges. We had an incident in Minneapolis where an interstate bridge fell into the river. That opened up our eyes, and I hope we don't have something like that infrastructure on our installations. But we need to have those things. Right now, the Navy and some of the bases near and dear to my heart are going through runway emergency repairs. In Jacksonville, Florida, I was there. The runway sweep truck in the morning drove straight into a sinkhole in the morning darkness. that was about 25 feet wide that was due to a failed sewer pipe that went underneath the runway. And if that would have been an airplane, it would have been a total loss. And that's the kind of things that we're experiencing. So that is a challenge that I think affects all DoD. And it's the tough part is when it's everyone's bill, it's no one's bill. And that's the tough part. So I've got to convince these warfighters with these great new beautiful systems. So I climb on a brand new aircraft, like I said, new aircraft smell. And then after that, I walk into the hangar that was built in the 50s. What are we doing? We got to fix that. That's my biggest challenge.
Thank you, thank you. Brian, when you look at your business, what challenges do you see on the horizon and what changes do you need to make?
Yeah, one interesting thing is technology changes. The FAA and its Aerospace Modernization Acts, they're trying to cram more airplanes into smaller spaces for efficiency's sake. Without exception, all the airplanes that you see around you today will all be incapable of flying in the year 2020, but for technology updates. So there's a major investment required just to keep these aircraft airworthy in the modern airspace in a number of years, which will be done. I mean, we've faced those challenges previously where new regulations and mandates are required, and the aircraft are modernized to react to that. But otherwise, an encouraging aspect to our business is that a lot of people don't, they like traveling privately, quite frankly, and there's a lot of reasons why it'd be nice not to have to travel on commercial airlines. So that's an opportunity, quite frankly, where the businesses and individuals that own these aircraft and enjoy the use of them for their business sake will continue to do so. Again, an opportunity for us is that the fact that they're not building more airports. Typically, they're trying to reduce airports, and yet demand has gone up. So, from an aviation real estate standpoint, that's a positive factor for us. Like I mentioned, the pilot staffing requirements is a challenge that we're, as an industry, going to have to adapt to. But the market will take over. The pilots are going to get paid more, and it's going to be an attractive job opportunity. So. The one thing that I will say is a challenge is, and we've seen it here in the last several months, is the reluctance to fly to Europe. All the airplanes in the room here and outside can very easily go to Europe, and yet the demand for those flights has gone way down. And so domestically, people are pretty happy to fly about, but just don't know that I'm going to go to Paris today. And so that has hampered demand. So if the world is an unstable place, some of what we do is a challenge that will need to be met.
Very interesting. I'm curious, when someone flies on one of your planes from a security standpoint, should we be concerned? I mean, do they just get to walk on the plane without going through security or check-in?
Well, we know our customers. Typically, we're not flying people that haven't been vetted. Everybody has to get vetted through the TSA no-fly list. All of our employees on a daily basis get vetted through the TSA no-fly list. If we have access to aircraft and all that. So at the very least, we're doing the minimum checks through TSA of all the passengers on board. No, your luggage does not get screened here, but our pilots are trained to observe and be aware, and certainly, it's prohibitive to carry firearms and loaded weapons and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, one of the luxuries of flying privately is that you get to drive right up to the airplane, crawl on, and go where you want to go without having to take your shoes off. But nevertheless, generally, also, when you're flying privately on one of these aircraft, you know everybody that you're flying with. So unless you expect the guys you're flying with to all of a sudden storm the cockpit, yeah, you're very safe. You're very safe.
Thank you. Travis, so you're in security, you're in IT. I mean, challenges huge in terms of the horizon. How do you meet those challenges?
Well, I think I'll focus on that question from just a business operations perspective. Listen, anyone that wakes up every single day, there's challenges with anything that you do. From a business perspective, what we're trying to do is trying to be more competitive. This environment gets more and more, the DoD space, the aerospace environment gets more challenging every single day. And we're trying to do things a little bit better, be more cost advantageous. The government beats us up every single day about, okay, you got to get your costs down, you got to get your costs down, you got to get your costs down. And we're sitting here saying, okay, but how do we do that? You want a certain requirement, you want us to meet certain objectives. How do we do it? You've been doing this with 50 people, now you want us to do it with 10? So things that we've been focused on is how do we better utilize technology and integrating technology into our day-to-day business operations. So if we utilize technology better, we can certainly we can certainly drive down our head count, which in turn would push a better cost to the government. If we don't have as many people doing a certain task, a certain function, but we can certainly accommodate the requirement of a statement of work, utilizing a technology tool, a business tool, that'll help us. But integrating that isn't that easy. So the challenge of how do you better integrate technology into your day-to-day business operations so you can become more efficient with your output.
Our firm is going through that right now, so I understand exactly what you're talking about.
You feel my pain, right?
I do. I feel the pain we're going through. Rick, challenges. How do we solve them? What are they, and how do we solve them?
Although I have transitioned financial service, I'm a huge advocate for advanced manufacturing, which the U.S. is gradually separated from to a large extent. U.S. advanced manufacturing sets the world standard. In fact, it has leveraged so many different technologies over time that the loss of that nature, that culture, what U.S. business is all about, is getting challenged every day. When I had congressional delegations meet down in El Segundo, the big thing that my pitch was, and all of the major players in the defense manufacturing world, was the industry base. Because when you lose that, it's the challenge to reconstitute the workforce, the relationships, the infrastructure, the integration with test range, and the development pace of technology. It goes away, and that's the challenge. I think U.S. and globally is something that I don't think gets enough attention.
Great. I'd like to open it up to our audience here for questions. Any questions? Sir.
I was on a business trip from Florida to
Hold on a minute.
4 years ago, and I struck up a conversation with the head steward. No, thank you. He'd been previously a co-pilot, but he was being paid minimum wage and his family was on welfare, and he was able to double his salary by being a steward. I don't think that was unique, and just wondering, in the face of that stuff, what's the solution for getting flight crews?
Trying to understand your question. In other words, that steward had been previously an airline pilot, and now he was serving coffee? Co-pilot. Certainly that's true in the regional airline business, where the first officers do not make a lot of money. They're trying to build time. And the challenge now is that those guys have to come into the regional airliners with 1,500 hours. In response to the Colgan Air crash in Buffalo, the government immediately reacted and imposed this 1,500-hour requirement, which those two pilots both had well over 1,500 hours, so that wasn't even the problem. The challenge for young pilots is to get to that 1,500-hour requirement. And in order to get there, they're starving student teachers. I mean, they're generally CFIs, flight instructors, and it's a tough gig. So that's why they're trying to get them earlier, while they still live at home, or have the airlines help subsidize the programs to get them through it. Most of the current generation of new workers don't have a long attention span. We've talked with others here recently that a lot of the younger workers don't want to be bankers anymore or insurance brokers just because it's not sexy enough. They want to go compute something or work for Google or Yelp or whatever. So young pilots, hopefully this is a sexy enough industry, but still it's a tough challenge to get a livable wage until you make it. Now, the captains on these airplanes and even the first officers, quite frankly, do just fine. But it takes a while to get there. It takes a while to get to that level. So that's one of the major challenges that the airlines are starting to try and tackle, is the pipeline of pilots.
And I could add into that a little bit. I mean, this is the challenge that you see when you talk about it. It's great to have military pilots transition over to the civilian world, but there's a definite division line. So you have initial commitment, and I'll just speak for the Navy because that's what I know. It's usually 7 years after they attain their wings that they owe the military. Well, if you do the math there, usually then the person's been in almost about 9 years, so it's also a difficult decision because you're almost near that tipping point of over 10 years, and now you're going to go to 20. But yes, they will have to, if they want to go to the airlines right from there, it's a tough slog. They're probably going to take a pay cut. It's going to be a tougher life. And a lot of the junior officers who get out because they don't like the life away from home. Well, if you go to an airline, welcome, you're away from home. And that's what I try to convince them when I'm trying to, I'm not battling against the airline industry, I'm just going to keep retention. So that's the battle that they choose. So then if you miss that point, and then the Navy has ways, we talked about, I think, Brian, you mentioned bonuses and things, that is coming back in the military. And the Navy is not dumb in this aspect. They place those bonuses at strategic points that keep people in a commitment that then gets them to a point where they say, well, I'm at the 15-year mark, why don't I just go to 20? It'd be silly to get out now. And then you get into the competitive nature of, usually then they're a lieutenant commander or a commander, and their hours are a lot higher, usually, especially in my community, in the 2,000, 3,000 range. And those people can step into the more better paying jobs and more of a lateral move as far as salary goes. But I don't think the airline industry can survive waiting for military personnel to go to 20 years and then come out. They need the young folks to come out too, but it's a hard decision to do, and that's just economically, I think, the way it is right now. It's difficult.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for your service in protecting our country and our allies.
Thank you.
I was fortunate to be able to benefit by being an intern, summer engineering intern at Point Mugu. And from there, I finished my aerospace engineering degree, first job out of college working for Lockheed on the space shuttle and solid rocket boosters. So Captain Brick, I applaud you for all that you're doing to keep the infrastructure here and the industry here in California. My question for you, I guess for anybody on the panel, is I just recently became aware of the whole issue with the Russian rocket engines, that it's delaying our ability to come up with new rockets for our space exploration for military use. And I'm wondering, the politicians that you interface with, was that a wake-up call for them to keep our technology and our production lines and our industry and our company strong, so that we don't, come into that kind of predicament again with other aspects of our military services and products and services? Thank you.
I'll start off. You guys may have some additional comments. Both in the military and both in industry, the first and pretty much the most important question that any politician that I engaged with asked was, how many people work here? How many people work here? And what are the threats to keeping them working here or enhancing the size of your workforce? So that's the number one priority in my estimation for most politicians, which I clearly understand. In fact, if you look at the strategies for industry, they populate a lot of their manufacturing sites around key congressional districts and integrate and have strategic partners to accomplish a lot of those political hoops that they have to jump through in order to get acquisitions through the defense budget. The issue with allies and partners on integrating collaborative events like space is very tenuous. You look at the Eurofighter, for example, and the Typhoon. They have this, collaborative between many different countries within the Eurozone, and that evolution and development program, doubled or tripled the same, program in the U.S. amongst U.S. manufacturers. So there's a challenge to that level of collaboration, and sometimes you'll get a partner who doesn't want to play like all the rest. Maybe it's an occurring or recurring incident or event that challenges those relationships, and you have to drive through it and work through it. But on the aviation, aerospace, military side, we see that these large, challenging collaborations usually have time penalties and cost penalties.
Great. It is almost 9 o'clock, and we do want to get you out of here by 9 o'clock. I want to thank our panelists this morning for being here and participating. And one other thing I want to mention, I want to thank 3 individuals up here, Captain Yankee, Travis, and Rick, for serving in the military, and just want to acknowledge and thank them for their service in keeping us safe. Certainly do appreciate it. Again, thank you very much for being here this morning, and thank you everyone for coming. Jeff?
Great job. Let's thank the whole panel once again. It was a wonderful. Had friends who wanted to see this, or you wanted to see it again, County TV has been here. They've been putting the entire thing on tape, and it'll be available, so just check out countytv.com. Thank you everybody for coming. We'll see you next month back up in Westlake Village.